I'm David Adams. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 5th ATS Mitral Conclave.
Hi, I'm Dr. Randy Martin. I'm thrilled to be joined by Dr. Rakesh Suri, who's known to many of you. Rakesh, good to see you.
Good to see you, Randy.
You've done so many neat things. We're not going to talk about robotics right this second, because you certainly have helped us understand that field. But tell me about, there were 3 points you were just talking to me about that are really key messages. Tell me about those.
We've been speaking in this forum for a decade, Randy.
Right.
So if you think about it, a decade ago, we were debating on the stage whether robotics would revolutionize mitral valve repair.
Correct.
And now, 1 decade later, that's old news. We're speaking about transcatheter aortic mitral valve repair and replacement. So if you think about it, actually, this is something Toby shared with me probably about 8 years ago. He said, Rakesh, don't worry about it hitting mainstream, even if you publish the data, until a decade later. And he's right. So when I think about mitral valve disease, which is the topic of this conference, of course, it took about a decade to publish the science behind repair as an advantage over replacement. It took about a decade to explain why robotic mitral valve repair was better for patients, providers, and the healthcare system. And now I think it'll take at least a decade to show why transcatheter mitral valve repair will be the next horizon.
It's interesting, but I mean, it's very valid points. Do you think it's going to take, it took TAVR a decade.
Yeah.
Is it going to take longer with mitral for transcatheter due to the complexity of the disease state or the pathophysiology?
You know, what was lost on the discussion today that we had earlier in the meeting was it took a decade in the US. It didn't take a decade in Europe.
No.
It took about
right.
6 years, 7 years. I think it'll take a full decade because, of course, the mitral valve is more complex.
Right.
And it's a science as well as an art. That's why I love, and many of my colleagues who repair mitral valves truly love it. It's not like going to the operating room and just sewing an aortic valve prosthesis. You have to really understand and imagine in your mind what that valve will look like once you reconstitute it with suture, thread, and annuloplasty, and then of course there's systolic anterior motion and the dynamics, and that's why it's such an interesting field, and that's also the reason why there's not a lot of high volume, complex mitral valve repair surgeons in the world.
Correct.
I think, Randy, that'll impact the future of transcatheter mitral valve repair in a big way. I think that having put in some cardio-bands myself, I'm fascinated with the technology, but I also believe and felt real time when I was implanting that annuloplasty that it was my decades of experience in the operating room or with the robot that helped me implant that annuloplasty so quickly. So I'm big on the future of transcatheter mitral valve repair, but I also think that surgeons working with interventionalists have a bright future ahead.
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt. You had another point, and that was the point of value for what you're doing or what we're doing. Tell me about that.
You know, when we started on the pathway of robotic mitral valve repair over a decade ago, it was very clear that, when these programs didn't exist at Mayo Clinic and Cleveland Clinic, that's actually how Tommy and I met. We were competitors, and then we became, good academic colleagues, and now we're partners. But what was very clear, it was both at Mayo and at Cleveland, we needed to prove that there was value in robotic mitral valve repair for patients, for providers, and for payers, the healthcare system. And we took a decade. It took a decade to publish that literature relentlessly, paper after paper after paper. But what it speaks to, Randy, is that classic value proposition, which in the numerator is safety, quality, and patient experience over the denominator of cost. And we have not been held to that as rigorously as our cardiology colleagues have in the transcatheter space. And I believe that moving forward, we as surgeons and as transcatheter mitral valve interventionalists, well, surgeons and cardiologists, will be held to this in a big way. And it doesn't take long to look across healthcare systems nationally and internationally. Literally, governments are rewarding healthcare systems and specialties that advance value for, again, patients and for healthcare systems.
You're also going to need, I mean, the value part of that's outcome. Obviously, that's a given.
Yeah.
The value is tied to some extent to the outcomes. I mean, it really is, don't you think? I mean,
Yeah.
and that's where your decade rule
Very much
comes
so.
in, right?
And I was fortunate enough to, over the last 4 years that I've been moving into administration along with my clinical practice, spend some time with Michael Porter at Harvard Business School. And of course, Michael is famous for advancing the concept of value. Now, value not only in the operating room or in the cath lab, but value in terms of early diagnosis, keeping people well for as long as possible. When we know that they require intervention, even asymptomatic degenerative mitral regurgitation, getting them to the right provider at the right time for the right therapy, getting them out of hospital as quickly as possible, which is why robotic mitral valve repair was so impactful, but importantly, following up for long term. And that's something we haven't done well. So when you look at end-to-end, it's keeping people well for as long as possible, treating them as quickly and as efficiently as possible, and then keeping them well for as long as possible after the intervention. That concept of value, I believe, will be spoken about with increasing frequency at meetings like the Mitral Conclave.
I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, early diagnosis leads to appropriate management, et cetera. The final thing, and it's sort of in closing, you've certainly touched upon it, this collaboration between colleagues, surgeons, interventionalists, imagers, heart failure physicians. Tell me about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would love to see this meeting advance the concept of specialty to specialty collaboration. And I'm privileged to have had the opportunity to do that at the centers that I've worked at, and now the Cleveland Clinic, where literally surgeons and interventionalists work shoulder to shoulder, whether it's TAVR or transcatheter mitral valve repair, to do the right thing for the right patient at the right time. I think this is going to be absolutely critical for the future of our specialty and for maximizing value for the stakeholders that we just spoke about.
Yeah, and I don't think there's any doubt also bringing in the heart failure people, as I said, the imagers and the
Absolutely.
EP world, so it's fabulous. Well, listen, you've given me a lot to think about, given our audience a lot to think about. Great points, 3 great points. Thanks very much for joining.
Thanks, Randy. It's always a pleasure.
It's good to see you.
You're looking great.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us.